Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Dill, Kirby Smart, the Georgia Bulldogs. Been rolling on the recruiting trail. Sound like they gonna continue to be rolling on the recruiting trail. Want to talk about two different things. Number one, some of the new names that have emerged as top targets for the Georgia Bulldogs. I'm talking about guys that very well could be committing to Georgia very soon over the next couple of days. Dill, second conversation, maybe what we'll lead off with here. What's the best way to recap what Georgia's done? Because I feel like the last 2 weeks we've just been hopping on and breaking down commitments and really haven't had a ton of time to sit, breathe, and kind of collect our thoughts on the guys in the 2026 cycle. Mini class superlative episode, just highlighting some guys that we think are studs in the 2026 cycle. One of my favorite things to do, because everybody's got different takes, and I'm sure the Georgia fans who are listening to this episode, the ones that live and breathe this program, y'all got some takes too in terms of your guys in the 2026 cycle. Let it fly in the comment section. To the Georgia fans, the amount of support been amazing. Appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. We're going to be breaking down some commitments, I think, relatively soon. Deal without further ado, class superlatives. Let's start with this. This is my favorite superlative to talk about. The diamond in the rough. When you talk Georgia in 2026, a lot of the attention goes to a guy like Jared Curtis. A lot of the attention goes to guys like Tyler Atkinson. When you look at the commitments that Georgia has landed in 2026, who's that guy that probably flying under the radar, but a guy that you think is going to be a damn good football player for Georgia over the next couple of years?
Grant Houston's the guy I'm looking at on the offensive line, and they got him listed as an interior guy. I look at the way he plays tackle because he is left tackle for his high school teams. He is a really good mover, and I think I see more upside than a lot of people. I feel like, again, you look at him, I think he's a pretty solid player. You look at how clean of a player he is, but I look at the way he moves in pass protection. I think this is a guy who can frankly kick in inside or out. I think he gives a lot of versatility, and I look at that as like a guy that Georgia probably needs to just continue to do a really good job with because they need offensive
There,
lines.
there, there was a reason they took that kid as early as they did. Until here's the funny thing about Georgia's class in 2026: you got 26 commitments, two of which are kicker punter. So essentially 20. Not saying those guys don't count, but like 24 commitments here. 19 of them are blue chips. Really, the only names that are non-blue chip guys are Georgia high school kids and guys that no doubt Georgia has seen a lot, have camped with them, have evaluated them. Dill, I think Graham Houston's one of them. Not necessarily going to be a guy that's ever going to be a top 100 national prospect. I promise you. Like, Georgia just don't take anybody on the offensive line. They did their due diligence, and Dill, the way I look at Graham Houston, maybe I'll push back a little bit with the upside. Like, I don't know if he has monster upside as a first team all SEC guy. What I appreciate the most about Graham Houston, and this could quantify as diamond in the rough material here, that's a you feel like is going to be a multi-year starter for Georgia, whether it's at tackle. I
I
think
want
it'll
to
be
push
guard.
back a little bit on what's missing about like really decent upside. Like again, are the traits there? I think he's gonna be 6'4". He'll probably play at around
Yeah,
6'5". It doesn't look like length is an issue. I think
yeah,
the athleticism is really good because it's not a problem at all.
yeah.
No, obviously you got to kind of adjust for high school level, but I look at the way he can move backwards. I look at the way he can change directions. I think his upside's a lot higher than I feel like maybe that recruiting ranking's giving him credit for. Because you look at the play right now, I almost think he should be
Yeah.
higher.
So sometimes, especially with offensive linemen, I think we get really caught up on, do we have verified arm length? And if it's 34, 35 plus inches, you get kind of catapulted up the board. And go look at a guy like Will Campbell. Like for so long, they're like, all right, he ain't going to work at tackle in the SEC, going to play guard. And made it work at tackle for 3 straight years. Then the conversation was, well, he'll kick in the guard at the NFL level. He going to play guard for the New England Patriots as well. Graham Houston, maybe not an Amarius Mims kind of frame where it's like, holy smokes, that kid was built in a laboratory. But then you turn on what he does at high school and say he's a technician. He knows what he's doing. And Dill, when you have the ability to land guys that you know are going to be good football players, of which I would quantify and put Graham Houston in that category, especially on the offensive line, which is such a difficult position to project. I can get with that. My diamond in the rough, Ryan Mosley at the wide receiver position. One of the more, in my opinion, complete wide receivers that you see in the cycle. And the recruiting services are all over the place on this kid. And Dill, I look at the wide receiver position in general with kids coming out of high school, and it seems like they're all just one-trick ponies. I look at Ryan Mosley and say, hey, he can go win vertically down the field, works the middle of the field very well, very dynamic yards after the catch, can make contested catches for you. He's a guy that you start going down the checklist of, hey, things you want to see with pass catchers. I feel like Ryan Mosley, you're checking off a lot of boxes with him. I feel like he's being slept on because he's not necessarily a guy that has the crazy verified track times. And I feel like we care way more than we should about and I ain't getting up here and say speed don't matter, because it does. That doesn't mean we sleep on a guy like Ryan Mosley, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Dill, how about immediate impact? One of these freshmen that, hey, they going to come in and they going to play right away, because Georgia seems to find a couple of these cats every single class. With the guys committed right now, who do you think could be that for Georgia?
I think Kamari Brooks is going to find his way into packages. Like, I don't see him necessarily as like an all-down starter his freshman year, but I look at what he can do, blitzing from space, blitzing off the edge, dropping into coverage. I look like those versatile front seven defenders, like even like what Jalen Walker was early on in his career, and even later on in his career, frankly, what Chris Cole was last year. Like, Georgia does find a good way of getting those guys on the field, and I think Kamari Brooks has a skill set and a versatility that I feel like Glenn Schumann and Kirby Smart.
Here's the thing: if you can rush the passer at a high level, whether you're an 18-year-old kid or 23-year-old kid, Georgia's gonna find a way to get you on the football field. And like you said, is it gonna be like a all-purpose, all-down guy as a freshman? No, probably not. It wouldn't have been my first choice, but I will say this: as a pure pass rusher, this kid can rip. And look, that if you have that skill set at the collegiate ranks, you're gonna get on the football field.
Well, and I look at it like, I feel like Chris Cole's eventually gonna kick back and just play kind of off-ball linebacker, and that to me opens up that opportunity, because I don't know that they brought that guy in last year in the 2025 class. More of a bunch of pure pass rushers, which again, I'm not you want those guys too, but I feel like Kamari Brooks will find a niche. Like, again, I don't think he's a play at 50 snaps a game, but I like 10-ish as a freshman wouldn't stun me.
I'm gonna go Chase Calakut. One, he's college ready body, and that's normally what prevents a lot of these cats from getting on the football field. It's just like it takes for lack of a better term, you gotta be a grown man if you want to play in the SEC year one. Chase Calakut has that body, 6'3", probably going to be around 200 pounds as he steps foot on campus. The other thing that's going to allow him to get on the football field is he can play any position. I think he can play safety. I think he can play boundary cornerback, can play the nickel. When you have the ability to be valuable at so many different spots, you're probably going to get some opportunities to play, or at the very least, be a valuable member of the two deep as a freshman. And that's what I look at Chase Calakut and say, because he can do it all, chances are Georgia's going to need him at some point during his freshman year. I'm going to go Chase Calakut. Future top 10 NFL draft pick, I'll start it out, James Johnson. I think it's so obvious. Now, Jared Curtis is probably the obvious answer, and I kind of just wanted to throw out a different name because I want to highlight guys that we ain't talking enough about. That James Johnson commitment deal, outside of Lamar Brown down in Louisiana, I think he's probably the best interior defensive lineman in the cycle. For Georgia to go into Florida and get that one done, box out Texas as well, the margins are small when you want to win a national championship. Not only adding this kid to your roster, but keeping him away from a team like Texas, probably the biggest win for Georgia in the 2026 class, at least in my opinion. I think this kid's going to be a dog for Georgia multiple years.
In that, being able to be a real disruptive force in the middle, like, again, there are a lot of guys who play good, clean football, like Brinson, Stackhouse, good, clean players.
Preston Carey going to be that.
Being able to be that monster, though, and a guy who, again, just gets in the backfield so effectively, so powerful at that spot. And again, I mean, when he gets his shots to be one-on-one, he's just overwhelms guys with a combination of athleticism and power. I'm with that one. Mine is Jordan Thomas. You talk a lot about Chase Calakut. I look at Jordan Thomas. I think he can be one of the better safeties.
We're going Jordan Smith.
Jordan Smith.
Yeah, and
Jordan Smith though at safety.
Athletic profile, Jordan Smith, and the Georgia salivates over those guys. Like, look, if you're long and you can run, you go and play, and we gonna want you.
But it's also like the ball skills are really, really good for the safety spot. Like you look at his high school tape. I mean, when they want to go one-on-one, they usually put him out on the corner, and he does a really good job. So I look the ability to move. I mean, the size, the ability to come in down, play in the box, but also just like the unique ball skills for that safety spot. I think again, like you look at some of the great Georgia safeties. I feel like he has some of those traits where. Again, you talk about Calakut being able to line up anywhere. I think Jordan Smith can do it, but I think maybe a different gear athletically in terms of what he can do.
This secondary class is nuts for Georgia, and we've seen them have some good secondary hauls. I don't know if we've seen a better one in terms of athletic profiles and versatility. Like all these guys can do so many different things, and there's so many different skill sets too. Because you look at Jordan Smith, like. A little bit of a ball hawk, and then you look at Zach Ford and say he going to be, whether he's playing nickel or box safety, like he going to be a presence in the run game. All right, who's next? The superlatives went longer for the boys. There's two names. So look, the most popular names: Kaden Prothrow, Tyler Atkinson, Derek Cooper, and I'll say this: I feel like Georgia's getting at least one, if not two. Like you feel probably pretty good that Kaden Prothrow, Tyler Atkinson going to be Bulldogs. Derek Cooper, I certainly ain't ruling that out. Here's an interesting name. We haven't talked about it once. Braden Fogel from the state of Ohio, Dill, committing July 4th. I like him a lot. And I think that my first thought was, well, what does that mean for Kaden Prothrow? I don't think it means anything, and I'll get to that, but I want to introduce Braden Fogel first. Dill, Hooper, and legitimate Hooper at that, legitimate Division I offers. Not necessarily the biggest, kind of a 6'3", 230 thick kid, incredibly smooth and coordinated mover. And look, I'm not making the Brock Bowers comp, but it's like, hey, Brock Bowers was special for a lot of different reasons. But one of the things that I think was the most slept on aspect about his game was just how smooth and coordinated he was. Like, there are tight ends that can run really fast in a straight line. They ain't a lot of tight ends that have good feel and that are really smooth and know how to create separation. Braden Fogel and his movement patterns, they're really good. And so going back to this conversation, look, Dill, Braden Fogel would be the second commitment at the tight end position. That doesn't prohibit Kaden Prothrow, because I was already under the assumption that, number one, if he wants to play tight end, he ain't getting scared of anybody. I think Kaden Prothrow is just kind of a different caliber dude. But Dill, number two, I could see Kaden Prothrow just staying out as a wide receiver. Primarily plays wide receiver in high school. Not a super broad frame. Like I struggle to see him getting up to 240 pounds with that 6'6" frame. Like a Mike Evans kind of just bigger bodied wide receiver. I could see that being the future of Kaden Prothrow. And Georgia, I think, wants to get some more difference makers in the pass catching department, regardless of what position that is for Kaden Prothrow. He's going to be that difference maker that Georgia's looking for as a pass catcher in this 2026 class.
Especially in a class that, again, you always knew would be hard to bring in a ton of high-profile wide receivers just because of what you brought in last year.
Sure.
When you have that type of class, it's typically hard. You just don't see a great path forward for playing for guys who have similar skill sets. So, man, you had a handful of tight ends who are uniquely gifted in their own right and maybe feel like they have more of a path to playing relatively earlier in their career. I think that makes sense in light of what they brought in at wideout.
And I'll say, like, when your team like Georgia uses the tight ends the way they do, like 3 tight ends ain't crazy when you're running a lot of 12 personnel. Last one that we'll talk about, Valden Sohn. It's crazy because I got up, and when I was breaking down the PJ Dean commitment yesterday, I said, with the commitment of PJ Dean, I'd be surprised if Preston Carey commits to Georgia later tonight. And that's exactly what happened. Preston Carey commits to Georgia. They got 5 very good prospects coming in the middle of the defensive line, and you have some flexibility with some, like a PJ Dean. We'll see where he lines up. they're going to take another, sounds like, or at least they are very interested in taking another one involved in Sohn and Dill. This is why it makes so much sense. You look at Sohn and say, all right, well, he's a reclass guy, 2027 to 2026, so he's going to be young, probably needs a year development. But number two, he's from Sweden. Like relatively new to the sport of football. This ain't a cat that's playing football since he's been 6 years old. Georgia there are a lot of programs that need their guys to come in and play early because they just don't do good enough job recruiting the numbers and bodies. When you're a team like Georgia that crushes at recruiting this position, you can afford to take a guy like Sohn and say, hey, it might not be there first 2 years, but the upside is there for a guy like Sohn. In fact, he represents a guy with the upside that not many players across the country have at this position. Georgia's put themselves in a spot where they can comfortably push their chips in for this kid and say, hey, even if he doesn't play for the first 2 years, we still going to be fine, and we're going to like what we have come year 3, year 4 with this kid.
I am really interested to see how they can, if they can box the rest of these teams out for that type of guy. Because again, you've talked about it so much. Like you look at a lot of teams need defensive tackles, and it's a thin class.
Yeah,
Georgia's stacking it up the way they are. It's like, again, it doesn't necessarily stun me because Georgia's been doing this, but like, I'm very interested to see how this
it's like we talked about it when PJ Dean committed. It's like, Dill, the reason Georgia's been the dominant force in college football ain't no secret. It's because the recruiting classes look like this with line of scrimmage guys galore. Kind of similar conversation with Jaw Jackson. When Jaw Jackson committed, I believe this time last year, basketball player, wasn't sure what it was going to look like. And look, most teams can't afford to take a tackle like that. We need our tackles that like can come in and maybe provide value early. When you're a team like Georgia and you have so many capable bodies, you can afford to take the lottery ticket. Sohn's kind of similar too. We'll see if Georgia can get that one done too. To me, it makes sense because you look at Georgia's development and then you put in a freak like that. He's going to be a good player after 18 months in Athens. We'll close it out there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. A little longer on the class superlatives than the boys were planning. Kind of a fun conversation, though. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. We'll talk to y'all later.